Hey, it's Brett, and you're watching Brett and Some Books. Today we're continuing Boxcar, Bertha, an autobiography. Please like and subscribe. This is Chapter 4. I set about to find a position. Finally, I spoke to the attorney who had defended me, and he offered me a place as housekeeper in his home. He was a remarkable man. His name was Lowell Schrader. He weighed over 200 pounds and was 6 feet tall, with dreamy brown eyes and rather long black hair that was beginning to gray. He was a successful attorney and had been in the Missouri legislature. In the last few years, he had begun to devote most of his time to labor cases and to the championing of unpopular causes. His particular interest at the time I met him was unemployment, especially among unattached women. When I came to work at his big house, his wife had been dead several years, and he was living with his mother and his son of 15. He paid very little attention to me the first 2 weeks while I was there, I thought. His mother did in the cooking, and I did the rest of the work. After I had been there 3 weeks, his mother went east to visit another son, perhaps at Schrader's instigation. I don't know. At any rate, the day she left, he told me gently, but not quite casually, and in a matter-of-fact manner, that he wanted me, and I spent the first of many nights with him. There was never any suggestion from either of us that it would be a permanent relationship. We wanted each other for the time being and took each other. Neither of us made any romantic pretensions about it, or talked or thought about a future together. After a while, Lowell's mother came back. She was 70, a blue-eyed lady, kindly, severe, and tyrannical boss of the whole household. She thought in terms of the kitchen and loved to cook and was resentful when I tried to help. Occasionally she became bitter and impossible, but I understood that I was an invader with a temporary lease and tried hard to be patient and kind. We finally became great friends. Lowell Jr. was a fine, tall, silent boy, devoted to and afraid of his father. Junior and I had often went for rides, walks, and swims. He had an ambition to be a lawyer like his dad. He was always gentle and considerate to his grandmother, and she worshipped him. The first few weeks after Schrader and I became lovers, I slept in my room until the family were supposed to be asleep before I went to his room. But after a while, we started to go to bed together, and nothing was said about it. While I was with him, I became acquainted with a number of men whose names loomed large in the annals of unemployment in Hoboken. The two most distinguished were General Jacob S. Coxey of Massillon, Ohio, who led the famous Coxey Army March of 1894, and Dr. James Eads Howe, known as the Millionaire Hobo, who had organized hobo colleges all over America. It was from Schrader that I got my first technical knowledge of the hobo problem. He told me that there were between 1.5 million and 2 million hobos roaming about the country, most of them men and boys. The most conservative estimates said that about half the 1% of them were women and girls, and that is about 1 woman to every couple hundred men. He also classified vagrants for me as hobos, the unattached men and women traveling around looking for work; tramps, the unattached, penniless ones tramping around for excitement and adventure; and, like myself, bums, who make up the third and smallest but most troublesome type of vagrant, the type addicted to drugs and to drink, and who have lost all sense of respectability. They are in the barrel house habitues, the type you see lying around in alleys and parks and booze joints. A bum, he said, is not a vagrant who drinks occasionally. Most vagrants drink some. A bum drinks all the time and doesn't care anything about jobs or society. Fortunately, this class is very small, and especially small among women. General Coxey was 70 years old when I met him there, but he was the picture of vigor and health. He had sparkling blue eyes and an erect bearing which gained respect for him wherever he went. He told the story of Coxey's army's famous march. In the fall of 1893, he was driving from Massillon, Ohio, through muddy roads to a stone quarry some 5 miles beyond. The roads were in such bad condition that the horses could hardly pull the buggy through the mud. The thought came to him that it was an outrage to allow 3 million men's labor to be wasting when they should be put to work building good roads and making other public improvements. When he got home from that trip, he sat down at his desk and wrote out a program of how to finance a good road and other public improvements. It was based on the 5th clause of the 8th section of the 1st article of the Constitution of the United States, which provides that Congress shall have power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and of foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. His plan was that the government should finance through community banks organized under state laws, farmers, merchants, manufacturers, partnerships, corporations, trusts, or trustees, and provide legal tender money without interest secured by community non-interest-bearing 25-year bonds for public improvements, market roads, employment of unemployed, and building homes. And don't forget any of that. The next step was to attract the attention of the nation to this plan. He attended the World's Fair in Chicago during the fall of 1893, and there met Carl Brown, who was a cartoonist and very well posted on the money question. Together they outlined a plan for the unemployed to make a march to Washington to start the 25th of March, 1894, to arrive at Washington and make an address on the Capitol steps May 1st. As soon as they announced their plan, the groups of unemployed on the Pacific coast as well as the Atlantic coast heard of it and commenced to organize similar marches to Washington. While they did not arrive on the 1st of May, they came in later, about 5,000, arriving in Washington. It took the main group 35 days to march from Massillon to Ohio, starting on March 25th, arriving in Washington on April 30th, so as to be prepared to appear on the Capitol steps May 1st. A request was made of Speaker Crisp of House of Representatives and Vice President Stevenson to allow Coxey to speak from the steps of the Capitol at noon May 1st. This request was not granted. Neither was it denied, and the next day they proceeded up Pennsylvania Avenue to the Capitol building, halted the army on a side street, and while Coxey started for the steps of the Capitol. When he reached the Capitol steps, he found a detail of police barring his way. "You can't speak here," they told him. He tried to read a protest which he had written out beforehand, and they wouldn't let him go and led him off the Capitol grounds and let him go. They arrested Carl Brown and Christopher Columbus Jones, who had gone on the Capitol grounds, and 3 days later arrested Coxey, charging all 3 of the men with treading upon the turf or grass and injuring the shrubbery. The men were tried and fined $5 each and sentenced to jail for 20 days. A bill drawn from Coxey's plan was introduced in the House of Representatives, and a hearing obtained for it January 8, 1895. Such hearing was granted by William Jennings Bryan, who was a chairman of the Subcommittee of Ways and Means Committee of the House of Representatives. This was the first attempt at any time of the employed in this country to appeal to the national lawmakers for redress of grievances and plan to take care of all unemployed on public works when there was no demand for labor and production. In 1914, Coxey made another march to Washington. This time, He was allowed to go on the Capitol grounds and address the House and Senate on the same errand and the same bill, and up to the present time that bill has been introduced into 11 different Congresses. Dr. J. Eads Howe was a wizened, Christ-like figure of a man, with sallow complexion and a short beard. His eyes were faded blue and apologetic, belying, along with his mild and almost tender voice, the sarcasm or stridency of his words. His grandfather Eads had built the great Eads Bridge over the Mississippi at St. Louis. His father had been president of the Wabash Road. It was his money, his love for the down-and-out, unemployed homeless men and women that had rented old halls for them to meet in, and had brought before them professors, labor leaders, heads of radical movements, doctors, lawyers, economists. The best were there. The best there were who talked to them of the social and economic situations and of their own predicament. In Chicago, in Los Angeles, in St. Louis, and in Pittsburgh, and New York. Wherever Dr. Howe could find somebody who would organize the speech schedule and buy the milk and donuts or coffee and buns that went with the lectures, he paid for the bills. He gave the unemployed a forum, a place where they could express themselves. He had made the unemployed conscious of their need for knowledge. He made them realize that the only power for their liberation lay in being informed. I also met a number of women hobos. Among them, 3 of the most interesting were Dorothy Mack, Lena Wilson, and leg and a half Peggy. Dorothy Mack was a stout girl of 24, with dark brown eyes and hair combed back from her face like a man's. She had been on the road as a hobo for over 5 years. Usually, she traveled by hitchhiking. She found that most of the time it was simple and good fun, though she found men difficult, often. More than once, she had been dumped out of a car in the country because she wouldn't give a man what he wanted. She had worked for all kinds of commercial firms demonstrating furniture, cosmetics, cleaners, and other things sold in department stores or drugstores. She said she could take any line of merchandise and get a little space in a store and get a crowd of women around her and sell it. But she didn't like to stay very long at any one job. When she had worked for a few months, she got rested and hit the road again. Lena Wilson was a tall, red-haired woman with kind blue eyes. She was a typical soapbox agitator and boxcar propagandist. She had been a member of the Socialist Party for almost a quarter of a century and said it was a full-time job. She had spoken in nearly every state in the Union. Unlike most agitators, she seldom paid any train fare. The railroads rob the workers, she said. Why shouldn't we rob the railroads? She had been on the road for 35 years and traveled with the roughest and toughest kind of men. She had slept in boxcars and in the open with crooks and with murderers. Leg and a half Peggy was born in the slums of Chicago, one of 11 children. Her leg had been cut off by the propeller of a speedboat when she had fallen out of it. She told me her story at great length, but it was such a constant repetition of one sex adventure after another that it seems to me to add little to the story of the Sisters of the Road. Peggy was a prostitute as well as a tramp, and wherever she had to make her little money, she sold her poor mutilated body to a man, and apparently there were plenty of takers. Several years later, I happened to run across Peggy in a Chicago department store. She was well-dressed, buoyant, and happy. She had quit hustling and settled down with one man, had finally married him, and seemed to have got completely over her desire for the road. One morning in the spring, while we were having breakfast, Ina came walking in, looking well and strong. She had developed considerably since I had seen her, and she was glowing and happy. She had been sent home by the juvenile court some months before, but had not stayed long. And while she had taken her first lover, a young poet, with whom she'd hoboed her way to St. Louis. She wanted me to join them and go to New York, where the young poet hoped to get a job in publication for his poems. The idea appealed to me. For several weeks, Schrader had been going to meetings and gatherings without taking me along, and several times he had stayed out all night without making any explanation. So I knew that he was tired of me, or had another woman, or both, and when I told him that I was going away, we were both relieved. That's the end of chapter 4. Please like and subscribe.